So last time we essentially covered the basics of just bad teeth, right? And going to the dentist as a kid sucks in general anyway, right? Especially if you have a toothache. And I know last time what we covered was fillings and me having to be put under and like actually essentially a surgery to do fillings because I had to actually be knocked out with anesthesia. This one's worse. That was honestly the mildest of all of my tooth issues. So, before I actually get into the story aside from the hey what you drawing part, I do need to do a little bit of a trigger warning. If you have really bad dental phobias to where you cannot hear about bad things happening in regard to teeth, or severe toothache, or extractions, or anything of that nature, this may not be the video for you. Maybe check out some of my more lighthearted, less tooth-related content, because this was legitimately traumatic as a child, and it can be, if you have any phobia with dental issues, you may not want to watch this. Now, if you are like me, and you still have a phobia, but you like to listen just to know you're not alone, alright, I don't blame you. I've listened to other people's teeth stories even though I am terrified. And so now that we've covered that big trigger warning there, let's start into this. So like I said, going to the dentist as a kid really sucks, especially when you have a toothache. So when I was a kid, I was about 9, I had an awful toothache. It was on the right side of my mouth, and it turned out to be an abscess. And I mean a really bad abscess. It turned out to be 2 teeth that were abscessed. They were still baby teeth, but it was, they weren't loose yet. They still had their roots. And when we went to the dentist to get it handled and removed, I had already been through a few different rounds of antibiotics, and it did nothing. Like, even when we went to the dentist this final time, my jaw was so swollen that it looked like somebody had hit me in the face with a baseball bat. It was so swollen and sore and painful, but they couldn't actually find a way to get at it to drain the infection. Now, the bad thing is, there was really only one dentist where we lived. At this time, we weren't where we were in the last story. We lived elsewhere. We had moved to a different city, and at least from what I can remember, it may have been the only dentist who took our insurance, or it may have just been that this was a fairly small town. There was more of a city nearby, but we were in a small town. Like, we had one elementary school, and that's it. Like, my elementary school at the time did not even have sports. It was so small, to give you an idea of how small this town was. So this may have been the only dentist in the area, or it was the only one that took our insurance. Regardless, I did not like her, because frankly, she was not really a good kids dentist. It wasn't even that she wasn't one who specialized in kids, it was that she was not good with kids, period. Now keep in mind, when I was a kid, I was terrified of needles. I covered that in the last story, I know I did. Now, this dentist completely disregarded that, despite the fact that my mother warned her that I was terrified of needles. They did not so much as gas me, which was another problem, because I freak out so bad I pretty much have to be gassed for a cleaning. That's how bad I am. And as a kid, I was even worse. Like, at this point, I at least will stay still, and even then I did out of fear. So here we are. I'm laying there. I'm already scared, because we're at the dentist. I'm already in excruciating pain from 2 abscesses. And here she brings the needle right into my line of sight. I do not understand to this day what the logic behind that was. Like, even just telling me, open your mouth, there's going to be a little pinch, because again, I wasn't 5 anymore, I was 9. I knew stuff was gonna hurt sometimes. I really knew it was a needle there. But not seeing it kinda helped. Oh no, this lady, she brings it right in plain sight. So of course, I'm freaking out. I was already scared and in pain, now I'm even more scared and still in pain. But I stayed still, to my credit. I will say, I stayed put and I let her do what she needed to do. But it wasn't simple. That was the biggest problem, was that this was not a simple matter. So she sticks that stupid needle in my mouth and numbs it. And that already hurts. Anybody who's had any kind of dental work knows that I swear the most painful part of the whole stupid thing is when they numb you. I hate it to this day. It's awful. But I stayed still and I let her do what she needed to do. But it did nothing. I could still feel everything. So she left me sit for a bit to see if it would work. To see if letting it sit would let it get in there and start actually working and numb the nerves. Still nothing. she tried again. And when she tried again, she was really exasperated, like it was my fault that it hurt, or like it was my fault that it wasn't working, which I guess it was the abscess's fault, which was on me, which I guess she was using that to blame me for the fact that it was still hurting and was still awful. But regardless, she was annoyed. And I believe she tried one more time and it still did nothing. And here was the biggest problem. The numbing did nothing. I had already been through a few different rounds of antibiotics, and it was still extremely abscessed and infected. And they couldn't get at it to drain the infection. Well, there was only really one solution for that at that point. Those teeth had to come out anyway. Now, as I said before, the teeth were not loose. They were baby teeth, but baby teeth still have roots until your permanent teeth, your adult teeth, come in. When your adult teeth come in, the roots dissolve. You get those little bits of them where they kind of hang on there whenever you have a loose tooth that you pull out. But they do have roots before that. So unfortunately, because this wouldn't numb and these teeth had to come out anyway, and this is why I had a trigger warning, as a child, I had to sit there and let them be removed because the infection had to be drained. And the only way to do that with where it was to remove the teeth and suction out the infection. It was so miserable. It was absolutely miserable because I had to sit there as a 9-year-old child while this dentist, who had no sympathy whatsoever for the fact that I was a child under 10 in excruciating pain and had to have 2 teeth extracted. By the time she was done, I stayed put, but I was hysterical. I was absolutely in hysterics because it hurt. And when you're a kid, you don't know how to process that hurt. You don't as an adult either, and I can say that from experience, which will be the 4th part of the Awful Tooth Saga, because of course it will be, because that figures, doesn't it? So it was so painful, and I was in absolute hysterics, and it took forever for me to actually calm down and for Mom to get me calmed down. Only for literally as soon as we got in the door, the second I saw Dad, I was right back into hysterics and just burst into tears all over again. Thankfully, I don't think that we ever went back to that dentist because we only lived in that area for a year, thankfully, because I can tell a bunch of stories about that place, and I probably will because, yeah, relatable, awful stories. Honestly, I listen to them a lot too. I don't blame other people for listening to them. But thankfully, this was the only real encounter that we had with that dentist, thank God, because at other dentists, at the very least, if you're a kid, at the end of it, you get like a sticker or something, maybe a toothbrush. I could barely get an "Are you okay?" from this dentist, alright? Let alone a toy or even like a little dollar toy like from Dollar Tree or something. This dentist was so horrible. I hope nobody else had to go to her because I wouldn't want my worst enemy going to her because she was that bad. And she was actually worse than one that we have around here. And since I have time, this one was pretty quick. So because I have time, I am going to cover some stuff from the other dentist that we have around here. The one that we do have in this area, who is specifically a children's dentist and should not be. Obviously, I can't say the name of the dentist place. Because, well, for a very obvious reason. Because I lived there. But when I was a kid, there was this one specific dentist, and yes, they are still operational in practice, and I do know for a fact that Andy has said that she will never take my nephew there because they're awful, and she remembers how they did us. And it's one that, among anybody in my generation, I think every single one of us in my generation in this area who grew up here and went there stays away from it. It's that bad. Still not as bad as the one that in the story, but still bad. Like, even though they specialize in being a children's dentist, even if the kid is terrified, they will not let the parent come back with them. Understandable to an extent, unless the kid is really young, in which case they still don't let the parent go back with them. But in some cases, when a kid is terrified, if having their mom there will help them chill out, let them have their mom there. If it actually lets them chill out and doesn't make things worse, because I get it, sometimes parents make things worse. In that case, yeah, don't let the parent back there. But this dentist did not. And because it was a children's dentist, once you were called back, you didn't stay in the main waiting room very long. You essentially got called back to get like your x-rays done, and then rather than go out and wait your turn or even go sit and wait in the dentist chair, they essentially had a little play area where you could wait. And I know I was not the only kid who hid in the little castle tower that they had while I waited. whenever it was time and whenever it was my turn. I know I wasn't, because I know other people, maybe my partner, I don't remember if Raven mentioned that she did this or not, but it was not uncommon for kids to kind of hide in the little, they had like this climbable castle tower that had an inside part, and a lot of kids would hide in it. I would just kind of bury myself into playing with the Legos, wanting to be anywhere but there, especially because where the little kids waiting room was with the toys and everything, it's right by the dentist chairs. You can hear every bit of the drilling and other kids getting upset and other kids crying, and the biggest problem was you could hear the dentist screaming at the other kids to shut up. And that's why I don't like that dentist. Because if you got upset, you were screamed at to shut up. You were screamed at and told off, and essentially everything that a kid that is freaking out and scared does not need. And they were horrible. I know there were times where I was in awful pain because I just had to have my mouth numbed, and that hurts. And I was crying because I was scared and it hurt. So I'm getting told I need to shut my mouth and be quiet, or it's just gonna take longer. And if I don't shut up, then it's gonna take longer and it's gonna hurt more, which does not help any kind of kid ever at all. And that's probably a large part of why they didn't let parents go back there, because there are plenty of parents, including mine, if they knew that was going on, who would have absolutely lost their minds at this dentist. And there was not really any staff members there who were good with kids. It's like with the teachers video in the last one. Why does it seem like teachers who don't like kids, not just teachers, why does it seem like people who do not like kids go into professions dealing with kids? I am convinced it is a power trip. Especially when you have instances of that, because I was fairly fortunate. There's no telling what all may have gone on with other kids. I've heard plenty of other kids getting screamed at and put in timeout because they're scared back there. And I actually would like to speak to a couple of other kids from around here who grew up around here who dealt with those dentists to see what their experiences were, because the fact that I was one of those who was terrified of getting in trouble, terrified of being in trouble or causing trouble or being an inconvenience, even as a little child, I did my best to keep my head down, to keep quiet. Yeah, I cried and that still got me screamed at, but I did my best to sit still and not throw a fit, even though I was absolutely terrified, because I didn't want to be yelled at. And then, of course, to any kid, what's one of the biggest threats? Because you don't know that your parent wouldn't put up with you being treated this way, you think you're just in trouble, they'll go, well, I'll tell your mom. I'll tell your parents how you're acting. And you freak out because as a kid, you assume if they're gonna tell my parents, then I must be acting really bad, and then I'll just be in trouble with my parents too. And that just makes things worse. And it makes you feel, especially as a kid, that you can't tell. So you end up not even realizing that you're being treated in a way that you should not be, because it's framed to you that you're doing something wrong, that you are the one in the wrong, and that you are the one who's the reason you're being yelled at, and that everything going wrong is your fault. And they would actively treat it like if you were hurting, it was your fault. It's still not as bad, as far as I'm concerned, as that other dentist. At least from what I remember, there's got to be something more that I'm not remembering well about that one dentist for me to believe that, with everything that I just said about the actual children's dentist. But honestly, especially with children's dentists, have any of you guys have dealt with that or are terrified of the dentist? Are you terrified of doctors? Because I'm scared of both, being completely upfront with you, especially if injections and hypodermics get involved. Because now I have several tattoos, but anybody with tattoos will tell you tattoo needles and medical needles are completely different things, and there's a reason that a lot of people who have tattoos are scared of getting a shot or their blood drawn or something like that. Just being completely honest. But definitely, if any of you guys are scared of the dentist or the doctor, let me know. Because I know that at least where I am in my area, there are so many other kids who had bad experiences with this dentist, and I'm repeating myself horribly, and I need to just come to an end with this. And so I got kind of two stories out there this time, because the second one really couldn't have made its own story. But with that, I'm going to leave this one here. Let me know any other stories or story times you guys want to hear, or your experiences with an awful doctor or dentist. I think I've got both that I can go through, honestly, if I remember correctly. I even have a bad eye doctor story I even have an awful eye doctor story that I can tell at one point that I'm probably going to have to tell at one point because I wear glasses. So I have a lot of stories like that. But that's all for now, and I want to thank you guys for listening, and especially if you were able to make it all the way through this, I really appreciate it, and I think that's wonderful of you. Thank you so much, and take care of yourselves. Before I go, I do want to thank my patrons, Inside Chaos and Salmon, and I will see you guys next time.